Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Can a £70 motherboard really power your dream gaming rig? Or are you just throwing money away? Today, I'm dissecting the true capabilities and limitations of budget motherboards so that you know exactly where you stand and where you can save without sacrificing performance. Over the years, I've built everything from a £400 budget PC to £2,000 plus workstations. One of the biggest money sinkholes that I have found is, overspending on motherboards for features that you will probably never use. So today, I'll show you what actually matters and what doesn't. And we're going to start by discussing one of the most common myths around motherboards, and that is cheap equals bad. And in my opinion, a lot of that's around marketing, RGB, and buzzwords to get you to buy more expensive boards. But for gaming and everyday productivity, a well-chosen budget motherboard can perform just as well or virtually the same as a mid-range motherboard. The trick is picking the right one and knowing the limits. Over the years, across the various price points, I have noticed one thing, and that is that the fundamentals themselves don't change. So CPU socket, RAM slots, PCIe 16 for your GPU, M.2 storage and BIOS. If the board supports your CPU and your RAM's rated speed and has a full-length 16 PCIe slot, you're most of the way to a solid gaming build. What that looks like in real world is 1080p, 1440p. You can be GPU bound, and a £70 to £120 board with a Ryzen 5 or a Core i5 and a mid-range GPU will deliver nearly identical FPS to a £250 board, for example, assuming sensible VRMs and current BIOS. But let's be honest and discuss where budget boards can truly limit you. Well, in all honesty, another theme that I've picked up on is it's the VRM quality and heat sinks, surprisingly. But be cautious pairing ultra-budget boards with Ryzen 9 or Core i9 or heavy all-core workloads, because thermals and boost longevity can suffer a little. Some other limits that we should probably discuss is that you normally get fewer M.2 or SATA slots, which limits expansion for things like large game libraries. And you have to look at things like your rear I/O and headers, because there are usually fewer high-speed USB and USB-C ports and fan headers. However, you can negate this with hubs or splitters, but obviously that does add cost. Next is memory support. Some cheaper DDR5 boards struggle at high Expo XMP, so be sure to check the QVL or the qualified vendors list. You do also have to think about PCIe lane sharing, as having a secondary M.2 sometimes disables SATA ports. So this is where RTFM comes in. Make sure you read the manual, or if you haven't bought your motherboard yet, look it up online. Lastly is BIOS polish. You may have fewer tuning options, so things like fan curve and granularity may be basic. But the bottom line is, if you're not extreme overclocking or loading up with capture cards and multiple NVMe drives, budget boards are usually perfectly adequate. Here is how I make sure I'm smart with my cash. So step number one, I decide the CPU first, as it's the heart of every build. So for things like gaming, very light gaming and light editing, consider a Ryzen 5 or the Core i5, as these are fine on entry VRMs. Or go for a Ryzen 7 or a Core i7 for heavy productivity, but try to aim for sturdier VRM heatsinks here. But next step is step two. So step two involves having a look at a list of things. So I'll run through a checklist to check for that it's got PCIe 16 slot, Gen 4 is ideal, but Gen 3 will work on AM4 value builds. I also look for M.2, so 2 of them, NVMe slots if possible, and at least one should be PCIe Gen 4. Another is to ensure that your rear I/O matches your devices, so check for USB if you need it. don't be left unable to use your peripherals. Or maybe it's a good excuse to buy a new one. I don't know. I also look for BIOS features, so I look for XMP, Expo, resize bar, and anything above 4G. I also look at the memory QVL to check that my RAM kit is listed, to avoid returning or selling secondhand at a loss. We've all been there. And then lastly, I try to look for BIOS flashback, as it's a really nice safety net. Step 3 is looking at chipsets. These prices are based off of the UK, as I live here, so apologies to anyone that's overseas. So for AM5, I would say Ryzen 7000 to 9000, and the B650 is the value sweet spot. Many boards for this kind of range you can pick up for about 120 to 180 on sale, or 180 to 240 for anything else. As I mentioned before, look for two M.2s and decent VRM heatsinks. So when it comes to Intel, look for LGA 1700, preferably 12th or 14th gen, and I found that the B760 is my go-to here. You can expect to pay around 90 to 160 for any that have reasonable IOs. And then for AM4, I usually go with the Ryzen 5000 because it delivers the best value. The B550 is still excellent if you find good pricing or used stock. So that could be anywhere from 55 to 130 for new, or clearances like 40 to 80. However, do be mindful that manufacturers now are at the stage of phasing out AM4 and DDR4. I have actually found that my wholesalers have started increasing the prices of DDR4, and it's getting harder to find B550 boards. So if you're aiming for an AM4 build, just bear in mind that support for them in the nearer future may be limited. And finally, my last step, possibly the most important one, spend where it matters more. So GPUs, SSDs and PSUs and cooling impact experience far more than a pricier board does. Whilst you're there, ensure that your PSU is from a reputable brand, so I'm talking Corsair, Be Quiet, Seasonic, the likes of those. I've actually done a video on Does Your Power Supply Matter? If you haven't seen it, be sure to check it out. I'll have a little link to it at the end of the video. So over the years, I have actually built quite a few of these combos. And although I don't have real world benchmarks because I don't have these PCs with me right now, and also I'm not sure how happy my customers would have been with me gaming on their new rigs on Fortnite for hours and hours, what I can tell you is that the FPS basically, or does, line up with the CPU-GPU combo. So there normally are no surprises, so there's no surprises when it comes to throttling or stability issues. The biggest difference that I have seen is, in fact, the total cost. So essentially, by choosing a budget board, you're basically saving yourself £40 to £120 versus those mid-range boards without losing any meaningful kind of performance, which is actually quite a big bonus. If I was to use that as a kind of a real-world example, so from 1080p to 1440p for the likes of Fortnite, Warzone, Apex, Baldur's Gate 3, what that gets you is average frame rates and 1% lows, which in my opinion, you can't really grumble at. It's value for money. So, to conclude, budget motherboards, they're not trash. They're actually tools. And when you take the time to match the board and your CPU to your actual needs, you can look to capture roughly 90 to 95% of the performance, at most importantly, a fraction of the cost. Yes, you might give up extras like premium VRMs, more M.2 slots and Thunderbolt, and of course PCIe lane flexibility, or even those high-end aesthetics that we all look for. But for gaming and everyday productivity, a well-paired budget board delivers excellent results. Of course, if you're a hardcore gamer chasing max FPS with heavy overclocks, or even a content creator who needs top-tier IOs and more PCI lanes with faster memory support, and basically a rock solid sustained performance, then you may need to look at the higher end boards. But there are a couple of key facts to focus on. So we want to be looking at things like the essentials, so VRM quality appropriate for your CPU, that you have enough USB and storage, and that you've got connectivity to meet your needs, as well as memory support on the QVL. Also, make sure that you have features that you will truly use and spend where it matters. So GPU, CPU, storage, cooling. Basically, let the motherboard be the smart, efficient foundation rather than a little bit of a budget sinkhole. So that's the end of the video. As always, I always appreciate you watching to the end. Now I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about your budget board wins or even your horror stories in the comments. And if you found this helpful or at all interesting, please make sure you like and you subscribe so that you don't miss on the next video. That's it, guys. Take care, and I will see you on the next one.